Simon, thank you for coming and talking with me. You and I had many conversations about the ecological crisis, the growing, or at least the deepening gap in incomes globally. And you've even made a wonderful joke about it, that if the human species were to be graded by the creator at the beginning of the third millennium, the creator would write, does not play well with other species. But jokes aside, you also said that the ecological crisis runs along the same lines of the economic, social, political, gendered, and racial oppressions, which, much like your concept of unequal ecologies, is, I think, very vital. And there's one thing you've written that I think is vital for us to understand. And I'm just going to quote it here. It says, "We can make ourselves more knowledgeable, change all our laws, fashion new policies, and even design cutting-edge sustainable technologies. But none of these will take hold until we change our relationship with the natural world." And I think you hit the nail on the head right there. And of course, your anthropoharmonic ethic speaks to that. So I'd love to go deeper into that.
No, thank you, Simon. I really think it is a question of relationship. And part of the anthropoharmonic ethic is not only to move us away from an anthropocentric ethic, but to get us away from the great chain of being, which showed that hierarchy of God, angels, humans, animals, etc., in this hierarchical locked framework. And we were superior. So our relationship was one of dominance and superiority rather than deep interconnectivity. So the anthropoharmonic is an attempt to move us out of that worldview of a great chain of being where we are masters and superior to all the rest of creation. Reshaping our relationship. And that's why it doesn't matter if we have wonderful sustainability initiatives and technologies, if we still think we are controlling and mastering nature. We're not showing our dependence and interrelationship with the living world. When we do that, we know that we are not conquerors, but people who are contingent, dependent. And that's where that notion of dialectical contingency comes in.
I want to talk to you about that. How does that work?
It works in several ways. One is acknowledging that, on the one hand, as humans, we have remarkable power to destroy much of creation, fortunately, and to alter our relationships with creation. On the other, we are completely dependent on this earth and on the unfolding cosmos for our being as earthlings. So it's a dialectical contingency where, just like breathing, when we're in relationship with the forest, here, the trees in this courtyard, as we breathe in and inhale the oxygen produced by these forests, and we breathe out any CO2 that is ingested, like we're in a relationality with all of this growth around us. That's a dialectical continuum. It's a dialogue of dependence and mutuality. But it's not restricted simply to our breath and the tree. It's all of what we do with all of creation.
So we can have that relationship, as I believe you once mentioned, with fire.
Yes. And this is where indigenous lifeways are very helpful and instructive and insightful. I think I've mentioned to you being at a conference with a number of physicists and indigenous elders. And one of the indigenous interlocutors, Damon Beat, a Mohawk filmmaker, was speaking, and he said, this is why we, in our tradition, have ceremonies. This is why we have fun and go to the fire. This is why we thank water. This is why we thank the air. Because ultimately, we are the earth, we are the air, we are the fire, we are the water. So it's acknowledging our deep interpenetration with all of creation. After he sits down, Helmut Burkhart, a physicist in Toronto, says, it's taken me 40 years to come to the same conclusion as a physicist, as Danny Beaton arrived.
Wow.
I took the long route through Western science, but we are now realizing at the subatomic level and at other levels that what Danny just said is true. That we are the earth, we are the air, we are the fire, we are the water. That we are sharing matter and energy, often at the subatomic level, in ways that we never understood. So this dialectical contingency that was understood by many cultures, including many indigenous cultures, and was ghost-guessed by mystics and poets and writers, is now being scientifically and empirically studied and introduced.
Wonderful. So your anthropoharmonic, an ethic way of being, maybe, it has us live in a far more harmonic, convivial way with all around us, but at a radical level, because we are not separate from that. Did I get that right?
Exactly. And that we can learn from and benefit from and be inspired by the energies and voices of the more than human world. And so when we don't avail ourselves of these energies, when we don't spend time in the more than human world with the animals, the four-legged, the trees, when we don't experience the air and the weather, we cut ourselves off from not only that information, but that inspiration. Albert Schweitzer, the great theologian and humanist who won the Nobel Peace Prize as a medical doctor working in parts of Africa, had this notion of reverence for life. And he said all species that we know of have a will to live. This leads to an ethic respecting that will. We share that with all reality, all living reality. And that's a common energy to live and to flourish at some level. And so the energies of this tree here to grow, spread, flourish, reproduce, are energies that we share and many, if not all, of the world's species share themselves. Therefore, there's a commonality of energy. When we work against it and we disrupt this relationship of fruitfulness and fecundity and life-giving expression, we're in radical disharmony. So it's anthro-disharmony.
So once we embrace and fully and engage with that the natural world around us, bringing this radical, I think you once used the word intersubjectivity. How might it serve as an antidote to the current anthropocentric ideas, notions that we are the masters, leading to our domination of the natural world?
That's a great question. And there's no simple answer. But there are examples and there are attitudes that lead to these good examples. So, say you're in a dysfunctional relationship with a friend, partner. One thing that might heal that relationship is learning to listen in humility. What is my partner saying? What is my friend saying? What is my housemate saying? As he or she is speaking, am I formulating my response in a debate rebuttal format?
Yes, yes.
Or am I really listening? And if that person has a critique of me, are my shields up so it'll bounce off and then I attack? Or do I listen and let it sink in humility? Maybe I am missing something. Maybe I am doing something that I'm not aware of. So being able in humility to listen then leads to the potential of self-revelation. Oh my goodness. My behavior hasn't been in concert with my beliefs. I have to change. I have to be mature. For this relationship to work, I'm going to have to step up and pick up my kids. How are we going to do that? Well, that's a spiritual, psychological practice, as well as a political and pragmatic practice.
I want to hear that because the wonderful sentiments, but how does one get there?
I don't think there's one acetate that goes over everyone's life as a one-size-fits-all. What I can do is share some things that have worked for me and for others whom I've read. It seems that a notion of gratitude is very important in terms of changing life.
Okay.
So there is research being done that you know about, of course, in neuroscience, about creating new neural pathways. Mindfulness meditation is one such pathway. There is a well-known author, Jon Kabat-Zinn, who has developed mindfulness meditation techniques for a wide spectrum of people. In the latest version of his book on this topic, Jon Kabat-Zinn writes, when we first started this research, we knew it worked, we didn't know how. The same thing with 12-step programs, Alcoholics Anonymous, Al-Anon, Gamblers Anonymous. Right. We knew that it worked. Many people were getting it, but we couldn't see this. Some people had a spiritual awakening, but that couldn't be verified empirically. What we're finding now is that those meditation practices, tools, spiritual practices are creating new neural pathways in the brain. That is now being diagnosed through advances in neuroscience. So some people liken it to being top of ski hill. So you're on Blue Mountain here in Ontario, in the middle of February. Everyone's going down this one route, and it's like a worn path, and it's got icy, and a lot of people are wiping out of that. Yeah. But there's another way, and you want to try a new pathway. You can create those through these practices. Gratitude is one of those practices that may lead to new neural. In addition, there are practices of exposure and appreciation of love. And this is being scientifically researched as well. Wonder. This isn't just great for certain chemical release in the brain, endorphins. This is very important, researchers are now suggesting, for our mental health. This notion of awe and wonder. Part of it is, there's a bigger reality that goes with that humility. I am happy to be part of this larger creation, which goes with the gratitude. I think this is pretty special. I want to see it continue, which can lead to activism, conservation, protection of sacred spaces, and of natural areas. That's part of the spiritual, psychic reality of the epic. Another way this is expressed is through compassion. And a major area here, I think, and I don't begin to pretend to know a lot about it, but the role of self-love. How many of us wake up in the morning, go to the mirror and say, I should have done all these things by now. I wish I had done, and I've got all these things to do.
Well, not before my coffee, for sure.
Well, yes. Now, some of us brush our teeth before we have our coffee. But some of us go into the bathroom, oh, what, I should have done this. Why didn't? And we have an imaginary cat o' nine tails, the self-flagellation tool of an earlier time. So we begin our day whipping ourselves. That's not a good platform for social, ecological, political personhood. The new neural pathways that we've been talking about lead to a kind of acceptance of who we are. A healthy self-love, not a narcissistic self-love. I'm a decent human being. I have flaws, but I'm going to be doing what I can. And I'm not going to beat myself up for things that haven't happened or live in the future and catastrophize over what might happen. Because that's another way of beating myself. I'm going to be mindful and present to each moment. I'm going to be present to the reality that I can engender as a perfectly imperfect human. And this self-love translates into healthy and I think sane activism. Love is the move. And this is how love finds itself in crucial environmental and social activism. It was at the heart of Dr. Martin Luther King's message. Nothing can dispel hate but love. Hate cannot dispel hate. Only love can dispel hate. When we have all this toxic horror show coming out of the United States with the Donald Trump machismo, contagion, vituperative, horrible maligning of immigrants, particularly immigrants of color, the maligning of women, physically and verbally. The response is not more vitriol. Love is the movement. And love is the most powerful force in the universe, I believe, that helps animate this tree, you and I, our filmmaking. It's also the most powerful force for positive social change. It's in the cosmos.
It's wonderful. I love the whole idea. It's not just change a way of thinking. You're talking about a practice born out of humility, a practice towards others, but also within oneself that bears out a sense of love that is energizing and serves as an antidote to the hate and destruction. And this practice, I imagine, is daily, ongoing. I'm curious, and maybe leave you with this one question: how do you live this out in your daily life? How is it manifested within our busy, must get done, agenda full item days?
Great question. And each person finds his or her own response, I'm sure, to that. For me, one key dimension has been spending time in nature every day. So I tend to be an early riser, but that's the time for me to go into natural spaces in Toronto, where one can find them. So along the Humber River, in Timberlake Park, and to try to spend at least an hour walking in nature each day. That to me is central. And you know the research better than I on the psychological benefits of forest bathing, of immersing oneself in nature, Richard Lew's work, etc. Last Child in the Woods, Nature Deficit Disorder. I'm recalling David Suzuki as head of the Suzuki Foundation, starting the 30-30 campaign for his employees and members of the Suzuki Foundation. 30 minutes in nature for 30 days straight. Now, these are hardcore activists. These are people who stop dam projects. They put their bodies in front of bulldozers. They organize. We're going to spend 30 minutes in nature, 30 days straight. We need this for whatever we do. It's not just for the mystics. We can do this in our day. It's not impossible. A second way I've done this, as you know, is giving up the car.
Oh, yes.
And in Toronto, it's a luxury. If I were in Ajax or in a suburban area, it wouldn't be easy. So I'm not condemning it because many are forced to be in cars. I had the luxury of public transit. It not only saved me $10,000 a year, but it also enabled me to be mobile in a different way, to be present to my community in a different way, to have less stress. A third way I've done it, and not only is this not for everyone, it may not be for many at all, but I gave up my cell phone.
You gave up your
Cell phone.
cell phone, yes.
And that, to me, happened in a somewhat serendipitous, maybe mystical way. So my wife Hillary and I, as you know, Simon, we go up and have for a number of years, over 2 decades, to an ecological research station at the tip of the Bruce Peninsula.
Peninsula, I guess.
And one evening I was driving up there, and at that time there was no phone service there, no cell phone service, and no phone. It's a pretty remote spot right on Georgian Bay. And it was midnight, and I was on Highway 6 north of Lion's Head, heading toward Tobermory, and I had one of those flip phones. And texting was just coming. And I was not happy about this because I can't keep up with my email. How am I going to keep up with texts? And then something happened. The phone slipped into my coffin. And I said, that's a sign from the cosmos. I'm not going. So, you know, when you get a call from a Bell payphone, chances are it's from me. But that has helped me be present to each reality and not walk through nature this way.
Present to all of this.
Present to all of this and to these energies and to the people and to the squirrels and to the birds and to the insects and to the breezes. Not that I'm all self-attuned, but I am not distracted.
Mm.
And I find that distraction damaging. Damaging to my concentration, to my ability to relate to each other, to these energies, to this beauty, and to this woman, and to this. This constant interface with screens. The underside is being shown almost daily through the research. Is not only problematic psychically, it's problematic spiritually and ecologically because it cuts us off from what is real. It somehow makes us think that we can live off the earth.
And what is more vital and important?
And it leads to delusional thinking that somehow, if we build a new building all of wood, that's still not on a human scale, that is still not serving the common good, that somehow this is an advance. This is not. Technologically, it might have a lot of bells and whistles. Oh, it's wood. It's still an alienating building that is not built the purpose of the greater good. Unless we root that in and relate that common good of the human and the more than human in an integrated harmonic way, we're going to be in radical dysfunction and disharmony. So the anthropomorphic is inviting us to bring all voices in unity for the devotion and flourishing of life.
Thank you, Steve.